Think of the oldest, most imposing stories we have. A prophet swallowed by a leviathan in a raging ancient sea, or a solitary figure calling down fire in the sweeping deserts of the Middle East. These are myths built on absolute, unapproachable grandeur. Now, take that desert prophet, pull him out of the sweeping sands, and drop him into knee-deep, freezing Scandinavian mud. Dress him in a heavy wool coat, put him next to a local farmer in a biting northern wind, and wait out the storm. This exact collision of the divine and the deeply ordinary is the defining literary mechanism of Arcadia Borealis. Published in English in 1938, it's a curated collection of works by the Swedish poet Erik Axel Karlfeldt. His dedication to this specific, strange collision of worlds ultimately earned him the Nobel Prize in Literature, awarded posthumously in 1931. But it raises an immediate question. Why would a poet capable of winning the Nobel Prize take the most soaring narratives in human history and deliberately shrink them down to the scale of humorous, muddy, regional folk art? It turns out, shrinking the divine isn't an act of parody. By forcing untouchable figures to walk through a recognizable everyday reality, Karlfeldt built a tool to examine the human condition exactly where we actually live it. To see how he does this, we have to look at the core of the collection, the Dalecarlian frescoes in rhyme. Karlfeldt based these poems on a real tradition of Swedish folk art, where local villagers painted biblical scenes using the familiar red houses and architectural language of their own specific towns. He narrates these painted scenes through an alter ego named Fridolin. Fridolin is a walking contradiction. He is highly educated and well-read, yet he lives the life of a traditional, unrefined peasant. Through Fridolin's eyes, these localized biblical tales become infused with the everyday concerns of a rural bachelor. The epic narratives are suddenly interrupted by deadpan humor, the physical rituals of seasonal harvest, and deep romantic longing. Underneath that humor, there is a very real psychological tension. Karlfeldt wrote these poems during a period of rapid industrialization. The verses are anchored by a deep nostalgia for simple, fading peasant traditions, constantly pushing back against a creeping sense of modern isolation. Every physical detail becomes a deliberate act of preservation. Putting an ancient prophet in the exact, heavily embroidered wool vest of a Swedish farmer forces the reader to look at and value that specific material culture. These humorous rhymes reveal an isolated, modern mind attempting to cure its own melancholy. By dressing the divine in local homespun fabric, Karlfeldt forces us to treat fading rural traditions with the same reverence we give to ancient myth. The region of Dalarna functions as a primary character in this poetry, an active force that dictates the terms of every story. This is an environment defined by severe austerity. The narratives are completely governed by surviving biting winds, heavy snows, and a harsh, unforgiving seasonal cycle. Karlfeldt writes with immense, meticulous linguistic detail about the local flora and weather patterns. He uses the sheer physical weight of the environment to trap these lofty, ethereal myths tightly inside a living, breathing reality. In this literature, a divine figure cannot simply command the elements. To survive the narrative, they have to physically adapt to the ecosystem of the north, shivering in the cold alongside the farmers. The environment functions as a crucible. It strips away ancient majesty and leaves only what actually endures under freezing, rugged conditions, human mortality, and the resilience of our faith. This visual diagram breaks down the title. On the left, Arcadia, the classical Greek ideal of a perfect pastoral paradise. On the right, Borealis, the untamed, freezing landscapes of northern Sweden. Karlfeldt takes a gentle utopia and slams these two concepts together. This was a highly deliberate choice. By joining these words, he elevates the everyday, muddy reality of the Swedish farmer to the permanent, revered status of classical mythology. As a result, Karlfeldt completely refused to write broad, generic poetry that was aimed at a modern, faceless mass audience. He chose to look hyper-inward, focusing almost exclusively on his own regional heritage. By turning away from the broader world to focus intensely on the traditions of a few specific villages, he reached a level of universal resonance that generic poetry often misses. He proved that you do not need to look up to the heavens or back to ancient empires to find profound truths about mortality and faith. You can find them entirely by simply standing still, right there in the freezing mud of your very own backyard.